Imagine a king so feared, so loathed, that his very name became a curse whispered in the streets. A monarch draped in velvet and jewels, yet rotting from within, haunted by cruelty, obsession, and desires that turned his palace into a gilded cage of horror. This is the story of Ferdinand VII of Spain, remembered not as a savior of his kingdom, but as one of the most perverted rulers history has ever known. When he returned to power in the early 19th century, Spain hoped for liberation. Instead, they were given a nightmare. Ferdinand dismantled the liberal constitution, silenced freedom, and suffocated his people under an iron grip. But behind the walls of his court, the shadows whispered of something far darker. His paranoia, his twisted appetites, his desperate obsession with heirs that turned young women into pawns of his sickness. To walk the halls of his palace was to breathe an air heavy with dread, where servants lived in fear and nobles watched their daughters vanish into the king's private chambers. His reign was not just political tyranny, it was personal corruption that left scars across an entire nation. And yet, the darkest chapters were still to come. Ferdinand's life was a portrait of decay. He married 4 times, each union clouded with tragedy, manipulation, and despair. Desperate for an heir, he forced his young queens into the cruel cycle of expectation and humiliation, their lives consumed by the weight of his obsession. Those who failed to produce a child faced not only the king's wrath, but the quiet terror of living as prisoners in their own palace. History remembers him not just for his cruelty, but for the grotesque contrast between his public weakness and private indulgences. The people, once hopeful, began to see him as a monster in royal clothing, a man who betrayed his country and desecrated the throne he was sworn to protect. If you've been drawn into the shadows of this tale so far, I invite you to subscribe, because stories like these remind us of how fragile freedom becomes under the grip of corrupted power. Ferdinand's death in 1833 was not the end of his curse. He left behind a broken kingdom, a civil war, and a legacy of humiliation that Spain carried for generations. His story is a warning from history, a haunting reminder of what happens when one man's depravity consumes a nation. But the question lingers, was Ferdinand born a monster, or did the crown itself turn him into one? Share your thoughts below, because some ghosts of history still demand judgment.